Hi, I'm David Miller, and this is the first of 7 mini-lectures on Shakespeare's play A Midsummer Night's Dream. On the left, you see the titles for all 7 mini-lectures, with today's in a contrasting font. The slide sets are all designed in this way to help you keep track of where you are at any given time. Since our focus in this course is on how sons and daughters turn into husbands and wives, mothers and fathers, we'll approach Shakespeare's play by looking briefly at the history of English families in the 16th century to see how contemporary pressures and debates leave their marks on the action, characters, and language of the play. This approach should provide a solid introduction both to A Midsummer Night's Dream and to the major themes that run throughout the works we'll be reading. Before we get started, though, let's be clear that when we talk about English families in this period, we're talking about religion, social rank, and property. Shakespeare's characters are typically drawn from the upper ranks of the aristocracy, where the form and dynamics of family life were very different than they were among the poor. When Shakespeare does show us working men, like the mechanicals in this play, we don't see them as members of families. When he shows us servants, they belong not to families of their own, but to the great households where they live and work. So, for the record, there's a strong class bias to the forms of family organization that we see in a lot of older literature. As a result, the observations in this mini-lecture apply to the propertied classes only. You'll notice that as we move to the second slide, the outline on the left switches to the topics for the current mini-lecture. That's a pattern all the videos will follow. So we start with the effects of the Protestant Reformation, begun in England under Henry VIII. The Reformation altered the official state religion of England, but its effects extended far beyond the Church. Protestant reformers launched a series of culture wars aimed at refashioning ideals of family life, transforming education, and ultimately changing the form of government in England. The forces that gained momentum in the early 16th century in England led, in 100 years or so, to civil war and the execution of King Charles I. With Shakespeare, we're not there yet. Midsummer Night's Dream dates from the mid-1590s, near the end of the long reign of Queen Elizabeth I. The Queen is aging, her popularity is fading, and a combination of bad weather and crop failures are taking their toll. As you'll see, these immediate circumstances do turn up in the play, but before we zoom in on those, let's back up to look at some more long-range social changes that were underway. We can start by asking how the Protestant Reformation fostered changes in family life among the propertied classes. Social historians have credited the Reformation with consolidating the authority of the father within the family. For example, fathers took over some of the responsibilities that had belonged to the priesthood of the church, leading members of the household in prayer and serving as the spiritual head of the family. The authority of husbands over wives was increasing as part of this change. From the late Middle Ages through the 17th century in England, the typical form and structure of the aristocratic family was gradually shifting away from extended kinship networks and toward a more concentrated cluster, what we now call the nuclear family. And this shift weakened the relative position of the wife within the family. As part of an extended kinship network, she had her own kin and allies, but as the extended network weakened and the nucleus drew together, she lost that source of power. When the Protestant Reformation redefined the husband and father as the spiritual head of the household, it took the subordination of women within the family one step further. This doesn't mean that the status of women was uncontroversial, just the opposite. Remember, I called these changes culture wars. The rights and responsibilities of women were a subject of controversy and debate then as now, and there was a wide range of opinion. But the Protestant reformers, such radicals in other respects, were generally quite conservative on this score. Another change in this period concerned laws of inheritance. Changes in these laws gave the father more control over how his estate would be disposed. This increased the father's control even over adult children. At the same time as the structure of the propertied family was changing, so too was the political organization of England. The Protestant Reformation coincides with the highest point of absolute monarchy, and this means that the king's power was consolidated on a national level, just as the father's power was within the household. In fact, these changes mirrored each other, for the monarchy increased its power at the expense of those same kinship networks that were giving way to the nuclear family. The political powers of aristocratic kingship networks faded as the power of the centralized national monarchy grew. This put the Protestant reformers in an ironic position, for they bitterly opposed the assertion of royal authority in church governance. It was Henry VIII who in 1534 proclaimed himself supreme head of church and state. But for all their resistance to royal authority in the name of religious freedom, the reformers handed the king's propagandists a powerful metaphor. James I, who followed Elizabeth to the throne in 1603, claimed that as king he was the lawful father of his subjects and had as much natural right to rule over them as a father did over his children. All these forces are in play during the 1590s when Shakespeare writes A Midsummer Night's Dream, and so is one other. For almost 50 years, from 1557 to 1603, the king was a queen. And not just a queen, but an unmarried queen who used her virginity as a political strategy to retain power. This was a major stumbling block for a pervasive ideology of male supremacy and the sanctity of Protestant marriage. As you might expect, it led to a lot of backlash, a lot of male resentment. In 1599, the Earl of Essex actually tried to depose Elizabeth with an armed rebellion that fizzled in the streets of London. But while it never resulted in a successful armed rebellion, resentment of the Queen was real and widespread, reaching its high point during the decade of the 1590s, when A Midsummer Night's Dream was written and performed. Next time, we'll take a closer look at the way Queen Elizabeth appears in the language, imagery, and action of the play. As we explore this aspect of the text, we'll see that the metaphor of the king, or duke in this play, as father, and of the nation as family, it's a double-edged sword. It cuts both ways, offering both a critique of the Queen and a critique of patriarchal rule. It's an example of the way social and political ideologies of all stripes use family to think about the nation, and the nation to think about family. And it's an example of the way literary texts call out these metaphors, along with the ideologies they support. That's one of the ways this play is relevant to us now. Our society is still fighting culture wars over the definition of marriage and family, and in many ways these conflicts are directly descended from the Protestant Reformation of the 16th century in Europe. What I hope to show you about Shakespeare is not that he takes sides in these struggles, but that he takes advantage of them. What is the essence of drama? Conflict. That's why a writer like Shakespeare is drawn to the conflicts of his time, not because he has the answers, but because his art thrives on contradiction.